Hello again, everybody. So in this video, we're going to be talking about the second reading for this first week in the Principles of TESOL course, coming from the Seville Troika book. The chapter's entitled something like Foundations of SLA. So we're going to go ahead and get right into that there. Let me go ahead and share. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. So Foundations of SLA by Seville Troika. So they start out by talking about multi and bilingualism. And then they move into talking things about the nature of language learning, the role of natural ability and social experience, the differences between first language and second language learning, L1 first language, L2 second language. They also talk about the states of learning, so the initial state, the intermediate state, and the final state of learning, what that might look like for a first language learner, what that might look like for a second language learner. Then we're going to talk about the conditions for language learning. What is necessary? What do you have to have for language learning to happen? And what are things that can make language learning move along faster or with more ease? And then they talk about the major approaches, at least what they see as major approaches within second language acquisition research and their view. So this is the linguistic focus, psychological focus, and a social focus on language learning. Let's go ahead and keep going here. So multi and bilingualism. So the major thing to take away here is that there are just as many multilinguals in the world as there are monolinguals. So monolingual meaning somebody that just speaks one language, multilingual or bilingual, multiple languages. There are also multiple types of multilinguals. There's ones that grew up speaking two languages at the same time. There are those that learned or only knew one language and then later learned a second one. There are those that learned one language in a specific context at home, for example, and then used another language at school and work. So there's different types. We're not going to get into that right now, but if you are interested, I'm going to post a TED video talking about that and gives you a little bit more information. So just be aware that there are just as many as there are monolinguals, and there are different types, and there is different ways to become that different type. Now they move into next, the nature of language learning, talking about the role of innate capacity versus social experiences. So in the linguistics course, if you have taken it before or you will take it, you talk about the what appears to us to be the fact that humans have evolved to be able to acquire language. This is so very evident and seems to be very true for first language learning especially. So children are naturally adapted and have this innate ability to acquire language that they're surrounded by. If you have any experience with children, you'll know that you don't have to do anything with the child other than just live your life, and they're going to learn that language. Now, of course, social experiences also have an impact, much more so for second language learning, but in first language learning, again, language is a social phenomenon. It doesn't exist without having people to use the language. So being around caregivers and caretakers, they can provide for them the language that they need. Now, the next thing you'll see in the chapter, first language versus second language learning. You'll see babies learn the language regardless. It doesn't matter what language it is. It doesn't matter if they're around their parents, only their parents, or if they're around lots of different people. Babies learn the language. They don't have to be motivated. It just happens. Adults, however, more often than not, they fail. A lot more people try learning a second language and then stop at some point before they reach their goals. Not so for first language learning. And there's a lot more we can get into, but that's not really the focus. Just be aware of this, that there are differences between the two types of learning. Now, necessary and facilitating conditions for language learning. So there has to be some things present in order for both first language learners and second language learners to gain the language. But primarily, we're going to focus on second language learning. But input. Input is the language that surrounds the learner. They have to have it. If you don't have it, language learning is not going to take place. A facilitating condition, interaction. Being able to interact with somebody is going to take you a lot farther, a lot quicker than just being around input. Some would even argue that it's necessary. You have to interact with someone to be able to learn the language. It depends on who you talk to. Feedback, that one is much more of a facilitating. But there are those who would say that maybe it doesn't even facilitate. So feedback would be you saying something and then somebody giving you feedback saying, well, you didn't say that quite right, or actually when you want to say it this way, you need to do this to the language, something like that. Motivation. Someone's motivation is very facilitative. If they're highly motivated, they're going to put a lot more effort into their language learning and are going to be more successful. Instruction, much more so for second language learning. Actually, I would say it's probably not even really that important in terms of just language acquisition for a first language learner. You don't need to be in a classroom. You don't need somebody to tell you how to speak the language if this is the first language you're learning as a baby. However, second language learning, more often than not, is going to take place in a classroom. It's definitely facilitative. Whether or not it's necessary, not really. People learn languages all the time outside of a classroom. They're self-taught, or they learn in the wilds, if you will. So these are things to be aware of as we move forward. Now, the different approaches to language learning or language teaching, the language system, or SLA as a whole. We have linguistic, psychological, and social approaches. In the linguistic approach, there's a very strong focus on the actual language system. So there's an internal focus, which is what does that language look like on the inside, in the brain? And then there's the external focus. What does that look like when it's used? What are the kinds of roles and parts and components of that language? So this is going to be a focus on words. It's going to be a focus on sounds. It's going to be a focus on how you put words together. That's the very linguistic focus. Psychological focus is the focus on the brain and the learning and the differences in people's abilities. So aptitude, things like that. So psychological focus on the brain. How does the brain interact with the language? Focus on learning. What are the learning processes that are most effective? Or what are the teaching? How can we most facilitate teaching and learning? And then differences in ability. Why is it that somebody appears to be learning quicker than somebody else? What is going on there? And then social, a focus on the social environment around somebody. What kinds of context are they in? So microsocial is an individual's immediate impact in their personal life. Who are they interacting with on a daily basis? Who's around them? Who can they talk to or can they not talk to? And then the macro social is the larger, the broader picture. What's the political context? What is the availability of certain types of education? What is the impact of the world on that individual's ability or desire or opportunities to learn a certain language? Okay, so again, ran through a lot of things, was really fast. But again, as you read, you will see these things. This is just a brief overview of what you're going to encounter. So we'll see you on the next one.